Welcome to week 11 of Ethics and Responsibility. Today we're going to look at global ethics. Unfortunately, this is probably the one lecture and session that lends itself most to group effort, but we'll soldier on anyway. Global ethics and what that means to journalists. Okay, so first of all, we need to ask, is it possible or desirable to create a global ethics? A global ethics would be a code of ethics that would in effect, in theory, be applicable all over the world. Of course, there are lots of problems with that. Not everywhere has the same conditions and freedoms, but we're looking at if it's possible or desirable that a global ethics should be created. What would that ethics look like? How would it feel to work within? Where will it come from? And who will control it? Some of the issues we need to look at when we're discussing potentially a global ethic. So we'll start from there. So why would you want a global ethics? Well, for practical reasons, a non-global ethic is not really able to adequately address the new problems faced by global journalism, as in challenges to journalist authority, the concept of fake news, so much misinformation. We need a code that tries to guarantee that journalists, recognised journalists, are following a set of global ethics that they're responsible to, that they know are applicable to everyone, and that will work anywhere in the world and best represent humanity, best fight the fight for the downtrodden, etc., injustice, public interest journalism around the world, and to look at the reach and responsibilities that come with that. News media today, well, in the last 10 years, we've gone through a tremendous change. Online news is now the default news media for most people. Newspapers as were and TV bulletins, which were the dominant forces, which we'll talk about some of the consequences of that change as we go through. But those decision makers in those organisations told us what the news was, we told people what the news was, and went with that. So now there's a huge negotiation, which is a constant theme throughout all your sessions really, that anyone with a phone can put news or information online, but not everyone has the ethics and the training to do that. That doesn't matter in terms of being able to do it, but it does matter in terms of who you trust. Online news reaches worldwide, influence governments, warring factions, terrorists, and people in remote areas. It can have effects, good and bad, on people all around the world. So, in this world of multi-layered, multi-access, pretty much globally, a responsible ethics is needed where news media bring together a plurality of different religions, traditions, and ethnic groups. So this is a huge job, and this is a topic we normally would discuss more openly between us, because it's got lots of layers of consequences, different meanings within, but we'll carry on as we are. Right, how would a global ethics be different? Well, at the moment we have market-led ethics and journalism led by a market situation. The ethics try to ameliorate some of the effects of the market, which drive people to getting ever more quirky and often trivial stories, clickbait as we know it as. But also citizens with a global ethics would act as global agents, as in they would represent the interests of most people in the world, in humanity basically, rather than political or market demands. But serve the citizens of the world, bringing them news and information that they need to live their lives in a better way, and promote non-parochial understandings. Non-parochial being non-local, so you would have a global outlook on things, where there be a wider view of the world and the role of news within that world, because we would try and take on a global view of the way we present things. Okay, all very good, all very green and nice music playing in the background. But how will that go down on the news desk at the Sun, the Daily Mirror, New York Post, Sheffield Star, you name it, where experienced journalists work to deadlines and to a received list of news values that they contribute to and follow as well. Um, it's difficult when you're used to working for a market, a certain type of market. It'd be difficult to step from working for the Guardian to working to the Sun or the other way around. People do it. People are trained journalists who can work anywhere. But those ethics and those publications um, are different, obviously. How might a voluntary global ethics change tabloid behaviour? Would it change? Could it change tabloid behaviour? Is there a world in which tabloid behaviour, as we know it, doesn't sell units, doesn't shift information? Probably not. So we need to take that into account, consider whether it could work, does it need to work, where is this taking us, why are news outlets responsible for bringing the world together? Many would answer they're not. We're going to look at that with the view to how that might happen. So what do we think the global effects of stories like these are? These are quite odd stories, but that's okay. We still do this kind of stuff now, and this is particularly pertinent at the moment. EU, Brexit, fear of migrants taking our jobs were some of the things that drove the Brexit vote the way it did. Um, Headlines like this appearing all the time, a lot of the time in certain newspapers. These two newspapers in the same stable, same owners, same themes. Those will people argue there's this constant drip of such stories that made people um, vote for Brexit. Gives British journalism a bad name around the world. It's narrow-minded, it's jingoistic, and it's divisive. Some critics would say. The people who put these newspapers out would say, or would used to say, that's what we sell. People buy it, therefore it's the right thing to give them. Lots of different arguments away from that. Do people get what they want, or do people get what they're given and don't know any other? We won't solve that one today. Again, what are the global effects of these stories? One left their infamous story of a shock poll that was they got it wrong, and they presented it in a very divisive kind of way. 1 in 5 Brit Muslims sympathy for jihadis, so 4 out of 5 aren't sympathetic, 80%. Just the way of presenting it. And the Daily Mail there, migrants in the south. Cameron's attack for likening them to insects and the swarm on our streets. Obviously, dehumanising people in certain situations is a tactic that politicians have used over the years, and one that newspapers with a political view are keen to portray. The global effect of these stories is to portray Britain as a narrow, confrontational place looking for excuses to ban people from coming in. Not entirely, but that's the impression these newspapers give. And of course, certain websites are far more extreme than that. So the global effects of unbalanced and irresponsible reporting might be that they incite and encourage hatred and intolerance in the UK and across the world. Inciting hatred on a global scale is ultimately destructive. So if we're creating enemies for ourselves by the way we portray foreigners and those other than ourselves, that's not good for anyone. Not good for us or for the people we're talking about. Portrays the British public in a bad light, makes us look racist, small-minded, anti-Muslim, intolerant of other cultures, little Englanders waving our flags and telling everybody else to clear off because we're happy with our own way of life and don't want anyone else's. Obviously, there's conservatism, and then there's blatant jingoism. There's a difference. It also gives British journalists a bad name, portrays as inaccurate. It portrays journalists as being manipulative with A, the truth, and B, false information. The case of 1 in 5 Brits Muslim story, looks racist, it's anti-Muslim, and it's intolerant. You can't deny that. And then it was found out that it wasn't true either. So pretty much 4 strikes and we're out there. So, as we've done throughout this, we look at the underlying philosophies of these positions, or of the positions available when looking at these matters. And what we're looking at in this case is a closed ethics, which I'll explain later, and an open ethics, which allows more people to contribute. Closed ethics is more of an old-fashioned situation where news organisations, whether they be newspaper editors, news editors, TV bulletin editors, managers of a managers of a managers of a news agenda that's universally accepted or accepted in that organisation, which is more or less fixed, and we'll come to some of the elements of it in a few minutes as to how that's put together and to why that's portrayed as being the news agenda. Closed ethics is a discourse where guidelines are primarily or only intended for a small group, being it journalists or editors, and places limits on non-member participation in discussing, critiquing or changing guidelines. So you have the Press Complaints Commission looking after journalists who run the Press Complaints Commission. The standards and values are established and they look after themselves, and that elite keeps that ethics closed. Much of Western, as was, but we've moved on from then, but not far. Much of Western journalism ethics assumes journalism codes of ethics were intended for a select group of professional journalists, Ipso, the BBC Guide, etc. Citizens had limited means of participating in discussion and reform of those principles. So the only recourse a citizen had was a complaint in the old days, or a letter, or both. Letter to the editor, letter to the letters page, complaint, which might challenge the output of that news organisation in regard to certain stories, attitudes and positions the newspaper or the news outlet might take. An open set of ethics, which is more where we are now, social media era. In this instance, ethical guidelines are intended for a larger group, placing fewer limits on meaningful participation by non-members, including the ability to influence content changes. So now we've got people, the general public, involved in being able to influence and join the news agenda by their own comments, their own pictures, their own video. People with a camera, people with a phone, should I say, are now reporters if they choose to be. They have a means to record and to publish, which was never previously there. So a journalist ethics have had to take this into account. Open ethics encourages more open and participatory approach to the ethics discourse. As in, we talk about the negotiation of news. It's a process, not a product, is what we say now. So it was a product with a closed ethics. The open ethics is part of the process of journalism now, which is a negotiation between professionals and the public. Open journalism ethics will regard the code of ethics as intended not just for professionals, but for anyone who uses media to do journalism or to contribute in some way. It allows and encourages mechanisms that allow non-professionals to engage in discussion and content reform. People have a voice now, people can chip in, and journalists appreciate this, need it, because wherever the information comes from, it can be used if it's checked and verified. We've talked about in previous weeks. So this open ethics is more a negotiation between professionals and the public, all of whom have the ability to publish. That doesn't make them all journalists. So shifting back slightly towards where this idea of a global ethics came from. In the 1970s, there was a concern that American and British, European media values were dominating ideas on the use and purpose of the press. So we were all getting a bit, all the powerful countries were sort of filtering and interpreting news in terms of their philosophical, ideological, political standpoint, and what their publics wanted. That was the dominant force in the world. A bit like a news colonialism, if you like. So UNESCO set up New World Information and Communication Order, grow out of the New World International Economic Order of 1974, which sounds slightly apocalyptic and Big Brotherish, but that's the way they spoke in those days. They were going to change things. The McBride Commission in 1981 produced a report, Many Voices, One World, which was rejected by the US and the UK as a threat to free speech. So it gives you an idea, as the British press has mainly rejected any attempt to reform its freedoms over the years. It also rejected this report by the UN. Quite a famous commission called Galtung, two people called Galtung and Rouge, who made a study of news values in 1965. Okay, it's a long time ago, but it's still relevant now. It's a historical turning point, quite a landmark event. Their value, they look at their news values. They were based on the analysis of 3 national daily UK newspapers at that time. They looked at the news values that the organisations held and how they shaped the construct of our perceptions and treatment of international news. So how we see news in this country and how we interpret what news is and what news values are shapes the way we look at news from around the world and the way we treat international news. So very interesting elements to this, which we can look at later. I don't know where 1 and 2 have gone here, but we'll talk about those later. There are several intrinsic values that we look for in news stories. One is where it happens, who it happens to, the fact it's an accessible story and easily understood. It needs to mean something to our culture and or cultures that share our culture. As a reference, generally as a reference, things that which also, in this sense, reconfirms what I think we already know. Stories about famine in Africa, obesity in America and the UK, bureaucracy in the EU. So we have a bank and a body of sort of systems and ideas that we tend to look for confirmation of those from the news we're getting. So it's sort of a bit like the bubble we live in online. We look for things that we think we already know, and have our prejudices and opinions reinforced by fresh news. Reference to elite nations, if it happens to in America, Europe, Britain, it's more important than if it happens in India, South America, because we share cultures and they are developed countries. Reference to elite persons, we know about celebrity, politicians, sports people, musicians, actors, elite people. There's a global elite, media elite, and in reference to them is as increasingly, even since 1965, even more so, that balance of genuine news and celebrity news has shifted a long way towards the celebrities being pretty much the only thing that makes money if we're not careful. Also, negativity. Bad news is better for business. All news is about something going wrong generally. So it's the deviation from the norm that is the news content, and most of that is negative. You can look those up later. I don't know what happened to the first 2, but you get the idea. So Stephen J. Ward is very good on this, and there's in the seminar later, there's a clip of video of him talking about this, and he's very succinct and informed. In a global media-linked world where stories cross borders and can inspire positive change, but also incite massive violence, we need globally minded journalism. Can't argue with that. We have the power to upset people around the world. We have the power to make ourselves appear bigoted, to make them look alien, and we also have the power not to do that. And this is what this global ethics is ostensibly about. Having said that, an adequate global journalism ethics has yet to be constructed. Now, you don't have to think for very long about why a global ethics might not work, because it's fairly obvious to come up with some difficult issues to get over straight away. News media gather and spread text, video, and images from around the world with varying degrees of editorial control, which we've discussed. Most codes of ethics contain standards for organisations and associations in specific countries, which we know. We have different rights to the rights they may have in India, Eastern Europe, Azerbaijan, for example. They don't have the same kind of media rights we do. International journalism associations exist, but no global code adopted by major groups or news organisations, because one, is very difficult to do, two, there isn't really the appetite for it even now. A comprehensive set of principles and standards is needed for global ethics in journalism. With global reach should come global responsibility. Now that is new. In the old days, a news story would probably be a news story in one country and possibly spread around the world, were it such a huge one as the moon landings, Kennedy being shot, coronation, etc., etc. Now, I can go out in my back garden, take some pictures of some migrating birds, send them around the world, and that could be a news story around the world where the bird's rare. We don't need somebody to tell us what a news story is anymore for it to go global. Look at YouTube, look at social media, you know what I'm talking about. Here are a couple of things, I'll let you read these. It's no point reading it out to you. I'll read the middle one. What use would such a code be to me? The broadcasting code we have says we cannot criticise the seventh cousin of the Sheikh, forget his brother or son. If the code includes tell the truth, and if we are to tell the truth, we will be put to death following such a code. Sort of puts a nail in the coffin there, doesn't it? So these are some of the issues that we need to are beyond journalist control. Borders mean political changes. Political changes mean that information and journalism is affected or censored in many places, and global ethics couldn't really affect that. So we need to sort out the world before we sort out journalism, some people might say. Nonetheless, we're going to explore the theme. Another big issue is how will we pay for a globally ethical journalism when the people who make big money are those who flog gossip, scandal and celebrity clickbait? Fair point. I don't have an answer, but we need to have a code of ethics where people are put first, politics are second to the needs of humanity, and also we need to have a media or a global set of ethics that doesn't rely on clickbait to make money. How we're going to get there, I don't know either. So this is a case review on integration in this country from a few years ago, and this is the way that these two papers reported that report. Isolated, this is the Sun, isolated Islam. British Muslims are so cut off from society, they think 75% of the UK is Islamic, the report reveals. Daily Mail, misogyny and patriarchy, widening equality, says integration report author. So even in a review on integration, we managed to disintegrate ourselves in terms of our relationships with others. Are they the main issues from the report? Interpreted that way, yes. This is the way The Guardian does it. Case review raises alarm over social integration in the UK. Is that as direct, as compelling as those headlines? You might not like what it says, but it's certainly more forceful, and it's certainly more what's the word? Sensational, more aggressive compared to that one, which sells more. The Guardian isn't based on, gets its money from donations mostly. Not a huge sale, but a huge respect and following around the world. But when it comes to news, people generally like it. In this country, pretty hard hitting. They like people to tell them, give them an opinion, basically. They like to receive the opinion of the newspaper. Whether they agree with it or not is another matter. But British newspapers tend to be very direct and with their own style and their own politics, which we know, which is directly against a global ethics, I would say. So, is this dumbing down? Organisational change underpinned by technological developments towards multi-skilling multimedia news production, as in new tech, multi-skilling journalists who are capable of video writing, doing headlines, writing straight onto websites, interviewing, etc., etc. The pursuit of novel news markets is seen to convey a potential to compromise journalistic performance. So you're chasing all the markets there are, the trivial, the serious, and in between. You're doing it on all levels, and you've got to do it quick because there are no deadlines anymore. Every deadline is now because you're live all the time online. Is that dumbing down because you go for that market you can get? Or is a less elite driven news agenda, as in one that isn't dictated by governments, politicians, etc., one that recognises the importance of the emotional and the apparently trivial? We've certainly got plenty of that. And that offers wider opportunities for political engagement to all sections of society. So one view is that all this dumbing down makes people just accept fairly much this kind of thing. The other is that by using such terminology, using such direct and powerful words and headlines, is that you're actually getting people to engage with this stuff. Whereas if it was like this everywhere, people wouldn't even bother at all. Now, obviously, you could say, well, that gives the wrong impression. But if nobody's reading that, is that impression better than none at all? I don't know. I have my doubts. But there are two sides to that argument. So what about the other influence on the media, content and ethics? We've been through the technological and economic transition. We've gone through the technology one. We haven't gone through the economic one yet because we've transitioned to a much poorer news organisations with fewer revenue streams, unless you work directly online and go with massive audiences online and accrue advertising that way. Even then, advertising is difficult to get online, difficult to pin down. Smaller companies with smaller staffs getting big audiences is the way forward. The opposite of that is advertising financing journalism. Financing it, but cannot be allowed to influence it. This is an odd argument, really, that's largely, no, it applies online as well. Do advertisers say, I could put advertising your way if you cover this? It's not a new thing. It happened in newspapers, it was resisted wherever possible, and it's also happening online now. Increasing efforts to increase media companies' revenue and reduce expenses, as in get more money in, make sure less money is going out, which usually means staff cuts and pushes journalists into being more competitive. We talked about this in relation to what happened before the Leveson inquiry, journalists, phone hacking, getting the dirt and the stories from no matter where because they had to get them. If they didn't, somebody else would, and they'd be out of a job. So that competitive thing is still a big deal. Also, there's a delicate relationship between news and business executives of media companies. Does Rupert Murdoch tell the editor of The Sun what he wants in the paper? Probably not, perhaps on occasion, but that editor will know what his politics or the politics of the publication are. Occasionally he'll challenge them, generally he won't, in my opinion. So that conflict goes on there as well. That's another influence on media, content and ethics. Okay, that's the last slide. Oh, one more slide, sorry. Yeah. Public interest needs to be a factor. Is there a point beyond which news publishers will not cut costs? Apparently not, because news publishers continue to cut costs. Public interest journalism has suffered as a result. The example people look at as a Grenfell fire had local newspaper reporters been at some of those meetings where that cladding they put on the building was agreed upon, that may have been challenged. There may have been a challenge from the public had we known, had it been covered, and had that cladding been given a more thorough examination, and the whole idea of it being challenged more by a local press, that fire may never have happened. It's a long shot. It's a good example because it's hypothetical and the outcome was so tragic. And you need to say to news organisations, do they have any public obligation at all, as in providing news of value to local communities and national, international and global communities as we've looked at, or is there only loyalty and answerability to shareholders who want to make money? We have the BBC, we have the Guardian who work outside of that. Lucky to have both of them. Long may they continue. The central ground is occupied by papers that have to make money, and as we know, aren't doing so well at the moment. We have up and coming online news providers, none of which are working at that level yet, but we need to see how it shapes up in the next few years. For the time being, the global ethics looks a long way off. It's a good idea, it's a nice concept, it's something to bear in mind when you're thinking about the way things work. But so far, it's proved elusive, and I suspect it will for a while to come. Okay, you can read around this, there's plenty on there. We'll look at the seminar later. Okay, that's all for now. Bye.